The Ohio State Buckeyes, after bludgeoning Oregon and skull-dragging Tennessee, continue their college football playoff march against the Texas Longhorns, who pulled away from Clemson and escaped Arizona State. And that is the public perception here, because when you look at this line and how it opened up at Ohio State minus 4.5 and quickly crept up to 6.5 before dropping to Ohio State minus 6. The perception here is that Ohio State's going to win, and they're going to win big. And I think that's all the intro we need right here, because this has fireworks, this is explosive, and unlike the Orange Bowl, where I think when it comes to Notre Dame and Penn State, the focus here is just win the game, and whatever happens in the national championship happens for Penn State and Notre Dame because they haven't been at this level before. And it's a little bit similar with Texas. They lost their College Football Playoff Semifinal game, the Sugar Bowl last year, to Washington. So just winning this game would be a step up compared to what they had last year. Ohio State's the one team out of the four that I think is still in a national title or bust mode. And don't take that from me. Take that from the fans. So let's talk about the Cotton Bowl here, which takes place, of course, on January 10th, a Friday, at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Guys, before we get into this incredible matchup, I want you, if you haven't already, to hit the like button to give us a boost in the algorithm and share this video around so that we can continue to grow our base here on College Football with Sam. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so that way you can be a part of our awesome community, and you'll get notified when we go live Mondays and Wednesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and we have a plethora more content to share with you about this matchup. So much more. We have guests coming on to do their own individual videos with me to talk about this game and why Ohio State can win, why Texas can win. I will do a deep dive on this video and so much more. So you won't want to miss any of that content. So just click the notification bell right there. I'm pretending to click it myself. It's just that simple, doesn't take that much time. And also comment your thoughts on this game down in the comment section below. And by doing so, you'll enter our giveaway, which takes place, at least the announcement for the winners takes place, January 9th and 10th at the halftime of the Orange Bowl and Cotton Bowl, respectively. 4 winners in total, 2 of them announced in one game, 2 the other game. I've already mentioned the winnings several times. It's $40 total, $20 for my merchandise store as a gift card, $20 Visa card. Do that. And also, if you want to support the channel or join our Discord server, which I highly encourage you to join the Discord server. The links to those are in the description or pinned comment. But let's march on and talk about these two teams. And I want to talk about, first and foremost, what I think is the biggest matchup of this game. And that is the Ohio State rushing defense, which pummeled Oregon. Oregon was helpless on the ground. They couldn't get the run game going. In fact, Ohio State held Oregon to negative yardage because sacks count toward rushing yards, which I think is kind of stupid, if I got to be honest with you. But it didn't really matter in the Rose Bowl because Ohio State's rushing defense, even not factoring in the sacks, was, borderline generational in that game. Very impressive. You're talking about that unit and Jim Knowles against Steve Sarkisian in a Texas rushing offense that, look, is just, it's poor. It's been poor all season long. But I include it here because they have NFL talent, and because I know at the end of the day that Jim Knowles wants to run his defense by keeping everything in front of it, which means he doesn't want to, go in goal line or blitz a whole lot or send the house in the box. I think his ideal defense is what he was able to run against Oregon, where you rely on a lighter front to shut down the run, to keep you honest in the pass rush and pass protection, and you drop a bunch of guys in coverage, and you allow no big plays, and you rarely, if ever, allow touchdowns. And if Texas can get the rushing offense going, and if their offensive line can really feast here, which it's full of NFL players, so they can, and I would expect Cameron Williams to be back in this game, what that ultimately means is they'll throw Ohio State's defense off. And that is the pathway for Texas to win. is to limit possessions, is to be able to run the ball, and they have to do things on defense, of course, but Texas's defense is much more well-renowned and respected than their offense is. When you look at the analytics, when you look at the data and how Texas football has won games or competed in the big games this season, the defense has been the bell cow. The offense has to step up for the Longhorns here. TreVeyon, Wisner, and Jaden Blue need to be hitting their holes. They have to be. They have to be aware of the situation. Jake Majors, Cameron Williams, Kelvin Banks, Hayden Connor, they have to be blocking well and physical and not get fooled by stunts, not get scared. They have to hold their own weight because Jack Sawyer, Ty Hamilton, Tyleik Williams, JT Tuimoloau, and Cody Simon are just waiting to mess things up. And Texas's wide receivers, I think, have to block at a high and physical level because Ohio State's safeties and corners are hard-hitting, they're fast, they're tough, and they're strong. And it also goes the same with Gunnar Helm at tight end and others that back him up for Texas. That, I think, is critical matchup number one, is Ohio State's rushing defense against not just the Texas rushing offense, but include the offensive line there. Because if Texas can't run the ball very well, but maybe here and there they get a playoff on the ground, and their offensive line and pass protection is doing very well, I think that fulfills Texas's goal to have a shot in this game, more than a shot, a sizable chance to win. The second critical matchup is Ohio State's rushing offense, and I would also say pass protection against Texas's defensive front. Texas has a better defensive front than Oregon does. They just do. They are deeper along the defensive line. They have Colin Simmons, a true freshman, who's pretty close to an alien player. I think that Oregon's D tackles are better than Texas's in terms of ceiling. Like they're starting to like Jamari Caldwell and Derek Harmon. But Jordan Birch and Mateo Uyunglele weren't as impressive as I thought they were going to be. And we all know that Oregon is somewhat limited at DB and also a little bit at linebacker. Texas is much better in those areas. They just are. And I think because Ohio State won't have the same advantage air to air against Texas that they did against Oregon, they may have to do more on the ground, and their pass protection will have to be better than it was against Oregon in this game for them to get the same amount of successful passing plays. You got, Bill Norton. You have, again, we already mentioned Colin Simmons. You have Alfred Collins at defensive tackle, who I think is an All-American caliber player. You have Ethan Burke, and just also I forget who's the incoming UTSA transfer. I know his name's blanking on me. That's my own fault, but he's on the defensive line, rotates in, really good defensive end for the Texas Longhorns. And then at linebacker you have Benda for Texas. You have Anthony Hill Jr. for the Longhorns. And I think that front, and especially the fact that they can get pressure on the outside, not just on the inside, is something to pay attention to. Because Will Howard's O-line, look, I care about what happened in the Rose Bowl. I think Justin Fry deserves his flowers in that game. But it was still obvious from the beginning that they were not running the ball up the middle, and they were only running the ball situationally to kind of torture Oregon's defense and keep them honest. The rushing attack was in no way, shape, or form the bell cow, because it can't be. The O-line is not good enough to support a effective rushing offense. That's not how Ohio State's offensive line is built. It's a pass-blocking offensive line, and even then I think Will Howard and the receivers do a lot to help that pass-blocking unit out, except for Donovan Jackson, who I think's become pretty phenomenal at tackle. And what helps Will Howard is he often escapes to the outside and then finds someone downfield. But combine that with Texas's secondary being as good as it is, especially with Jahdae Barron, Michael Taff, and Malik Muhammad, and others that are back there, like Gilbo, for the Longhorns, and also this defensive front that can get pressure everywhere, outside and inside. Very curious to see that if pressure breaks down, will Howard be able to extend plays? Or if Texas can bring pressure at all, because I thought Oregon would bring pressure, and they did occasionally, but it was almost exclusively up the middle with Derek Harmon winning battles, and Howard could just escape, or by then he already found someone down the field. So that's the other matchup to pay attention to here. I think offensively, Ohio State's better on offense. I think it's pretty obvious in that regard. But there are some roster advantages for Texas when you look at these offenses. And I think that in terms of efficiency, in terms of watchability, Texas is not really close to Ohio State here. But in terms of talent, in terms of ceiling, potential, it's not as big of a difference as I think some people would think. You look at points per game, Ohio State 36.4, 6th, Texas 34.3, 15th. Points per play, Ohio State 0.578, 3rd, Texas 0.472, 23rd. When you look at red zone scoring attempts per game, Texas actually has more than Ohio State. And when you look at offensive touchdowns per game, Texas scores 4.3. Ohio State only scores 4.6, so not a huge difference there. When you look at total offense, Texas 444 yards per game, 12th. Ohio State 432.6, 22nd. Texas averages 6.1 yards per play. Ohio State averages 6.9, 24th and 4th, respectively. In the rushing offense, Ohio State only averages 5.1 yards per carry, which is 24th, and they really only run the ball well when they're beating down on you or just getting you through the air. When they constantly, time and time throughout this season, when they've had to rely on the rushing offense, they can't. That's why they have switched up schemes against Tennessee and Oregon, and not just have gone pass heavy at times, but they've went more vertical, and they've I think done a much better job at scheming and using eye candy and motion in the passing offense, because they have to find a way to rely more on their passing game while still keeping defenses honest and not just, showing their cards to their opponents. Texas only averages a very pathetic 4.5 rushing yards per attempt, 55th, which is not terrible, but I think for the talent on the O-line and some of the opponents they've played, it can be rather pathetic at times. And then in the passing offense, both of these teams are top 20 in yards per pass attempt. They're both outside the top 30, though, in yards per completion. Ohio State has the better passing offense, and I think that bears out in the fact that at wide receiver, Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka would both be wide receiver number 1 for the Longhorns, and I think that Carnell Tate would get some playing time for Texas's wide receiver room as well. QB is a push. If I had to lean one way, it would be Will Howard, but I also think there's an argument that Ewers, because of the rushing offense, has had more to do than Will Howard has. And I also look at their games in the playoff. Howard been pretty close to perfect outside of a few throws against Tennessee. I think that Quinn Ewers really showed his potential against Arizona State late in the game, especially on that 4th down. So I think I don't think we can ignore the potential talent at QB that Texas has. For Ohio State, I'd easily go with them at running back. That's an area of great disparity. Henderson and Judkins, who are both far better than either Jaden Blue or TreVeyon Wisner. At tight end, I think that Gunnar Helm is the best tight end out of these units. And everywhere on the O-line, center, guard, tackle, Texas is better. It's just, in terms of raw NFL talent, Texas is better on the offensive line and deeper. Now, the rushing offense and sack percentage would tell you Ohio State's O-line is better. But I think, again, you got to circle back to the fact that Ewers was injured for part of this year, and he's not nearly as mobile as Howard, and his receivers aren't as good. Like, for Ohio State, someone is open all the time. It's just whether Howard has the time to throw to them or not. That's not exactly the case with the Texas Longhorns here. I think that Ewers overall is more boom and bust than Howard is. Howard is more limited in terms of ceiling, and his floor actually might be lower. Yeah, it's lower than Ewers's, but he's played at a higher consistent level than Ewers has this year, which I think is not only, it'd be unfair to say that's only because of his supporting cast. That'd be unfair, and that would be biased. He's made some NFL-level throws this year. He's had some wonderful games, especially as of late. So, got to give him credit there. When you look on defense, I take Ohio State at D-line, linebacker, and safety. Wouldn't take him at corner. Wouldn't at all. I think that Texas has some of the best corners in the nation, and Ohio State's are just good. Everywhere else, though, Ohio State's better at safety, best safety room in the country, a little bit better at linebacker. I wonder, and I would think that Texas has better depth there, but I just think Cody Simon's insane at this point. And I don't know if Texas has anyone with his skill set and level of play right now. As for the D-line, this is another area where I have some questions. I would go with Ohio State a little bit everywhere, but not by a ton. And if you want to tell me that Texas has the better D-line, I will respectfully disagree with you, but I think there is a world where we watch the Cotton Bowl play out and we come away thinking, wow, Texas might actually have the better defensive line. It wouldn't shock me at all. I say that especially, too, because Ohio State's safeties really help with everywhere. Like, they are the Swiss Army knife of the defense. They're the unsung hero of Ohio State's defense is the safeties. They'll help out occasionally in pass rush, but mostly in run stoppage, pass coverage. They keep a blanket over everything. I don't think Texas has those type of safeties. They do have those type of corners, though, with Jahdae Barron, Malik Muhammad, and then you also got to talk about, Taff, Gilbo, others in that secondary unit. Of course, we've already talked about their linebackers and D-line, but for Ohio State, Jack Sawyer's a non-negotiable player. I'd say Cody Simon's a non-negotiable. When Tyleik Williams is on, he can be a non-negotiable player. Looking at these defenses here, they're both almost unanimously top 5 in scoring defense. When you look at opponent points per game, Ohio State only allows 12.1, that's first. Texas allows 14.5, which is 3. When you look at opponent red zone scores per game, Ohio State only allows 1.5, which is first. Texas allows 1.6, which is third. Ohio State only allows a whoppingly low 0.19 points per play, first. Texas allows 0.214. That's fourth. The only area in which Texas is better than Ohio State in is opponent red zone scoring percentage. Ohio State 61.76%, second. Texas 61.54%. They're basically the same. Very good at getting goal line stops. Both of these defenses are, spoken like Yoda there. Ohio State only allows 3.9 opponent yards per play, which is first. Texas only allows 4.1 opponent yards per play, which is second. The real kicker here is that Ohio State has the better rushing defense, only allows 2.7 yards per rush attempt, second, compared to Texas's 3.2, 12th. And in the passing defense, Ohio State allows 5.8 opponent yards per pass attempt, second, 9.6 opponent yards per completion, third. Texas allows 5.5 and 9.3, respectively, first and second. So it's so funny here in the sense that when you look at sack percentage, Ohio State's first, Texas is 15th, Ohio State's third in sacks per game. A lot of that is schematic and also the fact that they just have so much talent there. It's an elite combo, Knowles and the talent on defense he has. I wonder if there's a universe, though, like I mentioned earlier, where Ohio State actually has the better passing defense, even though the opponent yards per pass attempt and yards per completion says that's Texas. And I wonder if Texas might actually have the better rushing defense. And it's just the fact that, they had to play Cam Scatabo. And because of their offense and how their offense can very often be in between successful touchdown drives and 3 and outs, if maybe not for the fact that their defense, it seems, let me check this out here, it seems like their defense is on the field for quite a bit, but their opponent average time of possession is pretty dead even with Ohio State's. It's slightly lower than OSU's, but not that much lower whatsoever. So it's not something that I can exactly point to statistically. In terms of turnovers, Texas is much better at forcing picks. They force more takeaways per game. They're top 10 there with 2.0 takeaways per game. Ohio State only forces 1.2. Texas, though, they average 1.6 giveaways per game, and Ohio State only averages 0.9. So in terms of turnovers, Texas is a lot more variance. Ohio State is a lot closer together. In terms of turnover margin per game, both plus 0.4. Texas is a little bit higher if you extend out the values past the decimal place right there. I think that Texas is better on the lines of scrimmage. I think that OSU's D-line's a little bit better, but I think Texas's O-line is significantly more talented. Same with tight end. Obviously can be used for blocking. So I'd go with Texas at line of scrimmage. Special teams is a push, both very inconsistent at different times. Blue chip ratio, though, says Ohio State's more talented in terms of roster, and I would agree with that from what I have seen from my own eyes. You look at the broad team comparison here, according to FPI, Ohio State is 26.8 points better than the average college football team. That's second. Texas is 25.9 points better than the average college football team. That's second. Ohio State's first. So the top two teams in FPI are playing against each other. When you look at S&P Plus, Ohio State's 30.9 points better than the average team. Texas is only 26.1 points better than the average team. So it seems to be, by the power ratings, that Ohio State's going to win this game, and perhaps convincingly per S&P Plus. When you look at FPI and you factor in home field advantage a little bit in travel, which benefit Texas, and FPI does that, FPI is actually picking Texas to win, just by a sliver of a chance. In points per play margin, Ohio State is 0.388, first nationally, which means for every one play they run, compared to every one play their opponent runs, they outscore their opponents by 0.388 more points per play. In terms of expected points added margin, 0.281 EPA margin. For Texas, the points per play margin is 0.258. Their EPA margin is 0.26. So both of these teams do a pretty good job. Expected points added margin tells us in terms of moving down the field and preventing their opponents from moving down the field. But when it comes to cashing in drives for scores or preventing their opponents from cashing in drives for scores, Ohio State is second to none there. Texas is pretty close, but not quite in the same tier. And you look at the strength of schedules, Texas has played the 11th toughest strength of schedule, Ohio State the 8th. The Buckeyes are first in game control, first in efficiency, just like the Michigan Wolverines were last year. And I mention that because it's, as a Michigan fan, kind of a sign of good fortune. When you get to this point in the season and you're number one in points per play margin by a mile, Michigan was last year, number one in efficiency by a mile. OSU's not those things per mile, but at least they're number one in both, and it seems like they're peaking. That typically is a sign that you are going to win it all, just historically speaking. Georgia was that way in 2022. They didn't earn their number one in points per play margin spot, I don't believe, until after they played TCU, but they were number one in efficiency for pretty much the entire season, and also number one in FPI and game control. For Texas, they're third in efficiency, only behind Notre Dame and Ohio State, and they're second in game control, only behind the Buckeyes. When I look at coaching here, I think that Ohio State has the better head coach. I think that Ryan Day is a better offensive mind than, I'm gonna say that based off of how their offenses have been executed. I think Ohio State has the better offensive mind slightly in Day compared to Sark. I think that Ohio State is the better offensive staff and better defensive staff. I think that Jim Knowles is one of the best, if not the best, defensive coordinator in the country. Well, I don't think the same's true about Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly is still competent. Chip Kelly is still great. And you got to factor in like Carlos Loughlin and Brian Hartline, who are some of the best of the best in terms of, their position coaching. In terms of Texas, though, here's an advantage that Texas has. I think Texas is better conditioned. I think that Texas is, when it comes to the lines of scrimmage and when it comes to being a physical team, they're one of the most physical teams in the country. And I've already talked about that with the trench play. I've discussed it with the fact that they have a ton of NFL talent. And compared to Ohio State, where the NFL talent is like wide receiver and then DB And you have it, of course, along the D-line and left tackle with Donovan Jackson and the running backs. Texas's NFL players littered everywhere on defense. Ewers and some of the receivers, and maybe Gunnar Helm could be considered in that realm. But the epitome of Texas's NFL talent is Kelvin Banks. It's Cameron Williams. It's, you look at Alfred Collins. It's Colin Simmons several years down the line, who Jeremiah Smith deserved the Freshman of the Year award over him, in my opinion. However, back to my point about trench play and strength and conditioning and physicality, Jeremiah Smith's one of the most physical players in the country. He's at wide receiver. He's catching the ball. He's running his routes. Colin Simmons, whenever he's on the field, is having to, shove people over or use good technique to get around them. And maybe I'm sounding redundant here. And I admit, I think that Ohio State's strength and conditioning program is still great. It's near elite. I just don't think it's the reason why they win games. I think for Texas, the reason why they win games is more so to do with the fact that they just eventually bully you and they break you. And for Ohio State, I feel like they win games by overwhelming you. So I think that's kind of an example of how I think Ohio State's more tactical than Texas is. I think they're better coached. Look, Ohio State, and part of this is how the Big Ten calls penalties, but Ohio State doesn't get called for many penalties, and I genuinely believe it's because they're disciplined, because they're so senior-laden, and it's a bunch of really smart players that they run there. And that's not to say Texas doesn't have that. They definitely do. But I think the identities of these teams are different. I feel like I think last year's Texas is what Texas wants to be in terms of being able to run the ball. And for this year, they just can never get it going. And because of the roster edge and because of the coaching edge, I am picking Ohio State to win, and I'm picking them to cover. The spread is 6. And I'm not going big like some people are, because I do have some reservations here, as I've already talked about. I'm pretty confident Ohio State's going to win. It's 7 out of 10 confidence. Was tempted to put it at 8 or 9. But I think that with the O-line and D-line that Texas has, the defense they have overall, and the fact that they have... Look, the analytics say they're getting better at running the ball. Huge part of that was because Clemson is a bad rushing defense. But I think with Ewers' ankle healing up, there's actually some legitimacy behind it. Like, he'll be more mobile in the pocket, do a better job of avoiding sacks. Cameron Williams will be back, so I think he'll be better protected. The real battle here is not just in the trenches, it's also through the air, as we've talked about before. I just think at the end of the day that the trenches are still going to be pretty close. I think that both of these D-lines have I think that Texas's D-line has a pretty huge edge over Ohio State's O-line, but Ohio State's D-line still has a somewhat of an advantage in terms of production over the Texas O-line, and Ohio State through the air should eventually be able to crack that Texas secondary, especially with Jeremiah Smith. So I think at the end of the day, Ohio State wins. They cover. 24-17 is going to be my score prediction, but Texas can do what Nebraska and Michigan did. And Ohio State, yes, is playing at a different level than they did against Nebraska and Michigan. But Texas blew out Michigan. Texas is much better than Nebraska and the Wolverines. So I think that the point that Ohio State's so good that they're not going to play a game like they did against Michigan or Nebraska is a moot point, because Texas would beat both of those teams by 30 points. I mean, they already beat Michigan practically by 30 points earlier in the year. I'm pretty confident they'd still beat them handily now. So this will be a closer game than I think some people will say, but I'm picking the Buckeyes to win. I'm picking them to cover. I wouldn't be shocked if Ohio State blows out Texas here. And while I would be a bit surprised if Texas won, I wouldn't be shocked if they won. In fact, there's a part of me that almost sees it coming. But I think that Ohio State wins. They cover here, 24-17. They're going to play the winner of the Orange Bowl in the national championship game, and they're the favorites to win it right now. And Ohio State should be the favorites to win it right now because they're the best team in all of college football. So go Buckeyes, go Longhorns. Let's hope that this Cotton Bowl is an all-time classic. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel, And also hit that notification bell so that way you can get notified when new content from College Football with Sam drops. I appreciate you very much, and also share the video around to others who you know enjoy the sport of college football and love it as I do and as you do, and comment your thoughts down below so that we can have a conversation, because I want to know what you are thinking. And join our Discord server where we talk college football 24/7 via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Thank you to my Heisman Patreon members, Crash2488, Brascal Rascal, and Conlo OH. Thank you to my All-American Patreon members, Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye. And thank you to my All-Conference members, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus. Make sure to check out my merchandise store and or Patreon page, or super chat down in the comment section below to support the channel. The Patreon page and merchandise store links are in the description or down below in the pinned comment. I hope you have a wonderful day. It is December, so Merry Christmas and also Happy New Year. I will see you guys soon.